Good day, my dear Louisian Gem students. Welcome to our pre-recorded lecture. I am your Sir Jed, and I will be your lecturer today. Before we proceed with our lecture, as regards the subject matter today, let us first have a recap on our lesson during our teleconference session. During our telecon, we have discussed the definition of fallacy and the first category, which is the linguistic manipulation, where we defined it as the group of fallacies that exploits the cognitive fluidity of language in order to impress and intimidate, to seduce and to secure sympathies, or simply to mislead others. Today, we will be discussing the second group of fallacies, which is psychological warfare. Psychological warfare is hereby defined as the group of fallacies that seduce and intimidate man's sensuousness, emotions, and subconscious drives. In other words, in the use of psychological warfare, thereof hereby attacks the weakness of human mind or psyche. To fully understand this, let us have an overview of Sigmund Freud's psychological analysis. Freud developed a more structural model of the mind, comprising the entities id, ego, and superego, what Freud called psychic apparatus. These are not physical areas within the brain, but rather hypothetical conceptualization of important mental functions. The id, ego, and superego have most commonly been conceptualized as three essential parts of human personality. Freud assumed that the id operated at an unconscious level according to pleasure principle, gratification from satisfying basic needs. Ego, on the other hand, mediates between the id and superego, while superego refers to the external factor that ensures compliance with moral standards. In this sense, man is susceptible to psychological warfare fallacy because of the existence of id in our psyche. According to Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, the root of all suffering is desire. In this case, applying thereof to the subject matter hereby concludes that man is prone to psychological warfare fallacy because of his desire embedded in his subconsciousness. To distinguish psychological warfare from linguistic manipulation, the former attacks the weakness of man's mind, while the latter utilizes the power of words. In the current slide, you can see that under psychological warfare, there are 10 types of fallacies. We have meaning from association, misuse of authority, repeated assertion, attitude fitting, tokenism, poisoning duel, rationalizing, argumentum ad baculum, argumentum ad hominem, and confident manner. The first type of fallacy under the psychological warfare is meaning from association. The fallacy of meaning from association is perhaps the most abused fallacy in the production of commercial advertisements. Here, the advertised products are put side by side with logically unrelated things and ideas to suggest that if you purchase this or that product, you too get the associated things and ideas. For instance, a bottle of whiskey is shown in front of a famous masterpiece painting. The advertisers had carefully calculated it that the intended audience will associate the fine quality of masterpiece with the quality of whiskey. Meaning from association is a form of subliminal seduction. Marshall McLuhan, a pioneering theorist in mass communications, has even suggested that advertisements will not only seduce man's sensuousness and emotions, but even his subconscious itself. This is what McLuhan calls subliminal seduction. To understand clearly what meaning from association is all about, allow me to give you an example. This beer commercial poster associates the product with sexy and scantily dressed girls. There is no logical relationship between this particular beer and the ladies. There is a more obvious logical relationship between beer and the beer tummy or the beer blot, but advertisers do not associate these two things. The next fallacy is misuse of authority. The other term for this fallacy is argumentum ad verecundiam, or appeal to false authority. Since we cannot be experts in all sorts of fields, consulting and appealing to authorities are oftentimes useful. The fallacy of misuse authority happens whenever we cite an authority in one given field regarding an issue that is outside his or her field of competence. For example, when one finds a mathematical problem too difficult, it is only appropriate to consult one's mathematics professor, or when having problems with an English composition, the best thing to do is to approach the language professor. In this poster, a very famous singer who may be an expert when it comes to music and vocalization is endorsing a particular brand of soda, forgetting that she is not necessarily an expert on sodas. This is why this poster is an example of misused authority. The next fallacy is repeated assertion. It is a fact that it is easier to accept a lie that one has heard many times before than to accept the truth that one has never heard of. This fallacy repeats or multiplies essential and same assertion with the aim that sooner or later people will accept it as true. The fallacy of repeated assertion takes advantage of this psychological fact. An example of this fallacy is that more ingenious advertisers will compose catchy jingles or television scenes that will hopefully recur over and over again in the heads of the audience, so that even though the advertisement is no longer in front of them, they will still see it or hear it in their minds. But of course, stating a lie 100 times will certainly not make it true. Here in this fallacy, you can see the power of words in modifying the facts. It can also be seen here the weakness of human mind for believing in an opinion of the majority. In this fallacy, we learn that majority is not always right because sometimes truth belongs to the few. The next type of fallacy is attitude fitting. The person's attitude is his habitual way of regarding other people, object, situation, or idea. The fallacy of attitude fitting is done through inserting into the argument persons, objects, situations, or ideas that are known in advance to be positively or negatively regarded by the intended audience. This fallacy is best understood when we relate it to conditioning, because this type of fallacy is conditioning itself. In here, you are psyching other people with regard to what they want or what they desire in order to persuade them. For example, as early as the latter part of 19th century, the Vikings discovered a huge island that is 85% covered with ice. Wanting to attract more settlers, they named it Greenland. At about the same time, they also discovered another territory which was lush and fertile. Wanting to keep the island for themselves, they called it Iceland. They knew very well that other people loved the image of a green and fertile land, and were disgusted with the images of ice and frozen wasteland. Their strategy of naming in order to attract and repel was an early example of attitude fitting. The next type of fallacy is tokenism. Whenever substantial action is needed, but performing it would be too expensive, time and effort consuming, and even distracting to one's agenda, people often resort to tokenism. This fallacy happens when people are misled to see a token gestures as the real thing. This cartoon, for example, pokes fun on the creation of a department without necessary funding. Hence, the department is practically drawn on a blank wall. The real thing here is the department, while the token thing is the front door of the office. By presenting the front door without the real department, tokenism happens. Another example is the famous event in Plaza Miranda. On August 21, 1971, Plaza Miranda was bombed. Two grenades exploded in the middle of a political rally, which killed 9 and wounded several persons. Among the injured were Senators Rojas, Salonga, Osmeña, and Calao. To appease the people, the incumbent president publicly ordered a thorough investigation, fully knowing that after the excitement would die down, the public clamor for justice will also wane. Of course, criminals were never captured. We learn from this fallacy that people will only show you what they want us to see. And most of the time, what they want us to see is not real. So always be vigilant because you do not know when will other people will lie to you. Another type of fallacy is Poisoning the well. When one poisons a well, all the water that is drawn from it becomes poisoned and unpotable. The fallacy of poisoning the well works similarly. It happens when one discounts in advance the opponent's evidence, proof, or counter-argument, thereby preventing him from employing them. For example, when a biblical fundamentalist says theories are speculations, and speculations are always unreliable. Now, how do you prove your theory of evolution? He is already discounting in advance the value of a theory and has prevented his opponent to argue in favor of it. Another type of fallacy is rationalizing. When one's ego is placed in an unpleasant situation, one can spin untrue but pleasant reasons to settle things. If real reasons are not available, pleasant reasons can always be made. This is another form of conditioning, but this time, other people does not condition you. You alone performs the act of conditioning on yourself. For example, we have Aesop, a Greek folk hero and teller of animal fables. He had a story about fox who felt so bad because he could not grab the hanging bunch of grapes. After some more tries, the fox finally gave up and comforted himself, saying, "Anyway, those grapes are sour. Who would like to eat sour grapes?" This is an example of rationalizing, because the fox conditioned himself to stop grabbing the grapes because those grapes are sour. The next fallacy is argumentum ad baculum. Baculum, it is a Latin term meaning authority. This is the very reason why the staff of a bishop or an archbishop is to symbolize his authority over his diocese or archdiocese or his jurisdiction. This fallacy happens when force or the threat of force is used instead of proper reason. For example, a professor who is bombarded with numerous questions regarding the controversial subject matter can easily control everything by screaming, "Shut up," or else I flunk you all, because he commits this fallacy. Another fallacy is argumentum ad hominem. Thereof is another fallacy that still bears its classical Latin name. It simply means argument against the person. Normally, arguments attack the opponent's arguments and counter-arguments. The fallacy of argumentum ad hominem attacks the person of the opponent himself. It wrongly assumes that if you discredit a person, his argument is also discredited. Yet, obviously it does not follow that if a person is a thief, his arguments are all wrong. The last fallacy under psychological warfare is confident manner. The fallacy of confident manner is saying too little or nothing at all and only imploring impressive words and body language. When reasons, evidences, proofs, and answers are unavailable, one can still fool others by using proper gestures, well-calculated intonations, and positive language. This fallacy is not only useful to politicians who are forced to make stands and comments about so many things, but also to students who are taking oral examinations and graded recitations. We learn from our discussion that there is the fallacy of psychological warfare because there is pleasure. Pleasure makes man susceptible to any form of deception. Just as Plato have stated, there is weakness because there is body, because that body desires pleasure. I am not trying to say that pleasure is bad. What am I trying to point out is the fact that too much pleasure is evil. As Aristotle have stated in his book Nicomachean Ethics, that both extremes are evil. Therefore, man should maintain the balance between the two extremes to reach virtues. And we can only maintain that balance through regulation. According to Socrates, know thyself. Self-knowledge is the greatest form of knowledge. And in knowing yourself, you need to know what you want and what you need. After knowing those things, focus on what is really essential. Knowing what is essential is the only way to be immune from deception. And in searching for what is essential, look not with your eyes, but look with your heart. Look with your heart because one sees clearly with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Only the heart can see the essential because it is the only one who can understand what essential really is. It is because the heart has reasons of which reason knows nothing. With that, I end my discussion. Thank you for giving your time in listening to this pre-recorded lecture. May God bless all of you.